prior 2 days, I'd been in the lead vehicle with our team leader and driver and our lead interpreter. But we added 2 vehicles to the package, and we were taking out because we were taking our comm guys and setting some more comms up. So I got moved out of the lead vehicle for the comm guy and was in the second vehicle. Coming around the bend, and I can send you some photos and stuff, but I sort of flashed to the high right, and then you could see a bit of smoke. And so I said to our driver, like, Matty, let's go up, something's wrong. And when we got up, we could see a hole in the windscreen of the vehicle. And what had actually happened, that flash was an RPG. As we got out to inspect, all hell broke loose. We got opened up by a couple of PKMs to the high right. So we did, and then we came back, and Aaron and Dave, the driver and our team leader and the driver, were both deceased.
What's going on, folks? Welcome back to Beyond the Beret. All right, today I have Shane all the way from Australia, right?
Yeah.
From down under, right? And I wanted to bring him on. We linked up on LinkedIn, and we've just been going back and forth through email, and he's military over there, special operations. So I just wanted to bring him on and have him share his story and hope that somebody out there can get something from it. With all that said, Shane, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate your patience, because I know this has been in a long time in the making, but I'm glad we're able to schedule it and get it on the book. So with all that said, if you don't mind, please let the people know who you are, a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump right into your story.
Yeah, cheers, man. Yeah, it's good. I've been looking for this for a while. I actually love some of the recent interviews you're doing and some of the new perspective, which is good. Yeah, so Shane Healey, Sydney, Australia, joined the military in 1995. Always wanted to be a soldier since as far back as I can remember. Went into the infantry, and then had an injury to my back. Went across to our reserves for a while in the special operations side. Then went into the Navy in 2000 as a diver. And then after a few years of that, the only restriction I had was I couldn't carry a heavy pack. That got removed, so I went straight and transferred back to the Army in early 2004, and then got an opportunity to go to Iraq as a training instructor for the Iraqi Special Police Brigade. They were re-establishing that. Obviously, it was just after the debathification happened. So they had nothing, right, the Iraqis. So we had to literally rebuild a police force in special operations capacity to go into the second battle of Fallujah. We were at a place called Enya down south. And that's when I got my first real exposure to US SOF and US forces. And then in October 2004, I was actually on a joint convoy going into Baghdad. We got into an ambush, and actually a car came up to the right. I called it, fire control orders, engaged the vehicle. We got into it a bit. When we got to Baghdad, I didn't realise, but one of the big bosses for that program was on that convoy, Dan Smith. And he comes up and he goes, "Hey, mate, you go all right. Do you want a job?" And I went, "Huh, doing what?" He goes, "Exactly that." And I went, "Yep, training was getting boring." So I went across to initially the CMAT project, so the Coalition Military Assistant Training Teams. And what we did, I was the only Aussie to start with. And what was happening, and I didn't know anything about US politics at the time, and this is right coming into the election of George Bush and John Kerry. And so what Bush was saying is, I'm downgrading the troops in Iraq, but he was funding more private military contractors. And this was the real, not the birth of the security industry, but the explosion of it, and the real differentiation between private military contractors, private security contractors. And the difference is the security guys were your base guards and stuff, and your military contractors were doing military roles. So initially just doing some convoy kind of work, and we were setting bases up. So we would go into a new location, clear the location, secure the location, and then follow on, Australian Army training team was at Taji in Al-Kasik. US forces went to Baghdad, and one of those places was also Camp Fallujah out at just outside of Fallujah. And you had the Marine base, and the Iraqi base was right next door, and we were with them. So effectively, what became AAA, but we were literally living with the Iraqis and to go on with them. And I guess I'll circle back to being in the Battle of Fallujah and my real first exposure to combat and stuff. But after that, because of some actions during that, I got asked to go up the contracting ladder, do some OGA stuff in early 2005, and really work with what was at that stage Task Force 145. It was, I, especially for an Australian at that stage, it was really eye-opening at the birth of what became the most well-oiled special operations machine the world's ever seen, which is JSOC. So, and then really found my passion for the military in human intelligence over there doing that. So I came back to Australia and went into the Australian Intelligence Corps, direct entry back into Special Operations Command as a human intelligence targeteer. So basically, in Afghanistan, 2010, 11, 12, 13, going out finding the bomb makers, going out finding the IED facilitators, going out finding the Taliban leaders, building up the JPEL target packs, and then getting them prosecuted, tactical exploitation, tactical interrogation, tactical interviews, all the way through. We had our own detention facility, and you would literally had 96 hours from point of capture to be able to prove that that person is the objective who we're after and what their role in the Taliban, and then they would get moved up to Bagram. And that was absolute. That was awesome. I was working with local Indigenous forces, the NDS, and Afghan government warlords, meeting in villages with village elders. And it was, if I could have put a pin in that 2011-12 period, I'd live that forever. It was just it was awesome. Came back to Australia. The unit I was in our special operations community was responsible for WMD. So started looking at Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and those threat groups from a WMD perspective, moving chemical weapons, biological weapons, dirty bombs through Southeast Asia and into the Levant. Again, working with US units in that space. First group, the CRIF out of Okinawa, and other organisations, which we can get into later. And then that led me to wind up being the point analyst for Australian SOCOM for the Syrian chemical attacks in August 2013. So that was even right up to briefing our Prime Minister on what was going on over there, and not just the Australian response, but the Five Eyes response, because there was a lot of politics about who the Syrians and Russians would allow into Syria with the OPCW and the UN to conduct exploitation of those sites. So literally getting swabs and saying this was sarin gas, this was a nerve agent, this was chlorine or whatever. And there was a lot of, they weren't going to let the Americans in. In the Five Eyes, the Canadians, JTF2 and their CBRNE unit are phenomenal, especially for their training purposes. They were in Jordan. So anyway, yes, I was really involved in that. And then because I'd spent so much time in the Middle East and in source networks and stuff, just kept that going. And obviously that was the rise of ISIS. And then again, briefing, and wound up deploying into Baghdad in August 14 with US SOCOM into the BDSC for the counter-ISIS mission. We were the only non-Iraqi soldiers in Baghdad until April 15, which was Australian Special Forces and the US JSOC guys out of the BDSC. We were the first ones into the Caliphate, retaking Al-Assad Air Base. This is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to do this podcast with you and your audience, is I've spent most of my SOCOM career operating with US forces, and absolutely love it.
That's awesome, man. It sounds like you got a pretty full career. It sounds like you've done a lot, right? So we'll start at the beginning as far as the Australian military, and then we'll try to hit every single one of these topics that you've answered, that you've hit on. Before we jump into that, though, I noticed you got a lot of books in the back. What was the last book you read, and what was it about?
Well, if I was completely honest, it's the Find, Fix, Finish, and that's kind of about me. So I won't say that. It's a terrorism book about terrorism assessment of youth, and that, because that's kind of what I do now too, conduct assessments of convicted violent extremists for courts and stuff. I'm an avid reader. There's a lot of psychology books there, human behavior books kind of there about perception and stuff for human intelligence. A lot of biographies over here. These books here, I don't know if you remember, but in the late 80s, there were the SAS ABC books. They were the only real kind of original soft about the UK-22 guys going to do these massive missions. And I think there were some Delta Force ones. So they're like 30 years old. Bravo 20 was one of the first books, and I got to meet some of those guys. I've got a book by Matthew Levitt there about the Quds Force and Hezbollah. Obviously, all the ISIS books down the bottom. So if there's a book that is about terrorism or about the current state of play, Israel and that, I'm going to get it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I like to, right now, I think I got it down to at least one book every 2 weeks, and they're mostly audiobooks because I'm in my car a lot, but I try to keep my brain entertained and grow it as I try to, stay in the gym and grow the body also.
When you're doing that audio thing, driving and that, does it resonate? Like, I have to have, I don't know if it's old school, but paperback in my hand, sitting in, I just can't do the audio. It's funny, but because all I do is listen to podcasts when I walk. So, but I struggle with the audio book.
Yeah. So if I'm interested in the topic, like, it'll stick, right? If it's a topic I don't really care about, like, I have to have like a paperback in my hand. But if it's something that I'm interested in, like the information is going to stick, right? So it all depends for me. Now,
once I start a good book, I'll go 30 hours until I finish it. I'm not a couple of pages. I just go wrap. Yeah.
Gotcha. Here's another question for you, and then we'll jump right into your story. And I like to ask this question because, especially the military guys, because so much has happened throughout the military realm. I'm always curious as far as how guys answer this. If you had a time machine and you can go back to any point in history and change one significant event, what would that event be for you?
That is an excellent question. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Why that for you?
It's the most, I don't think history would have changed much with anything else until that. Like, curiosity-wise, pyramids and stuff, but from an actual changing of history, if he doesn't get shot and World War I doesn't start, I think we live in a much different world today.
Yeah, because maybe there wouldn't be a World War II, and then maybe the rest of the wars that followed would not be as popular. The military complexes wouldn't exist. So, yeah, I can see that. That's an awesome answer. So now we'll journey back to the beginning of your life. You mentioned that you've always wanted to be in the military. How was upbringing for you, and what led you to the military? Because we know that it's not something that, the faint of heart, gravitate towards. So why military for you, and what in your childhood led you to that path?
Yeah, so my father was a professional rugby league player, so NFL for you guys, in the 70s, a very good and famous one. I played that through what would be your college kind of system maybe,
Hmm.
and was very good at that too. My granddad was like, that's kind of the family business. My brother's still involved in, the NRL, and I was at training on a Tuesday night, and just I was 95, I was 19, and well, actually, I'll back up. So the other thing is all my family served in World War Two and One, and so both my parents' fathers were in World War Two. My mother's father, my pop, was 16 in New Guinea in World War Two, Kokoda. And I'm born on his birthday, and spent a lot of my early life, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, with him, and idolized him. My father's father was a signaller in the Northern Territory with the Australian Commandos in World War II. So we had Australian Commandos in East Timor and other islands fighting guerrilla warfare against the Japanese, and he was the signaller receiving those comms for resupplies and stuff for that, which is very interesting because even though that is such a significant and vital role, especially as we understand logistics, and that is, he always struggled with that. He never left Australia to serve in the war. And I'm like, but granddad, like with that, if you miss a comms window, guys die. Like guys when you're out in conducting those operations, one of the things that you lean on is knowing that the logistics and your medics and things are there. And those guys that were in Timor and Indonesia knew that you were going to get their comms windows and they were going to be resupplied and stuff. So yeah, it's always, that was an interesting thing. So yeah, so there's that family thing. And one of my uncles, so my father's sister's husband, he was career military and did 20 years in our special air service and water operator. And ever since I was little, we'd go to family dinners and he'd have his big dive watch, and I'd just take it off and listen to his stories. And he did some exchanges with the US. He did the US Navy EAD course, some other stuff with them, and he did an exchange with 22 SAS. And he in a lot of ways was my North Point and an idol of mine. And so it was more so that drew me to the military. But yeah, football was my family business, and it's interesting that I kind of didn't have the desire and drive for the tough stuff, so to speak, for training in the league, but thrived on it my military career, your selections and stuff. So, which is where, your passion is. Um, if you selection's easy if you want to be there, really, and that's, yeah. So that's kind of where I don't know, like, I just do not remember a time I didn't want to be a soldier. And yeah, and then, go to combat, which is why I chased the Iraq thing. We had special forces in Afghanistan straight away with the first country, because our prime minister was in New York on 9/11. And so, we had guys in Operation Anaconda, and
Hmm.
so I missed that window. And then we had guys in the early days of the Iraq invasion, and then our government pulled our troops back. And it's like, I've missed that window. So that when that contracting opportunity came up, that's why I jumped at it, because I thought, not knowing that, from 06 to 2017, where, like you guys, just combat everywhere.
Yeah.
But at 20, at the end of 03, early 04 in Australia, there was no real long term. We thought we'd missed the opportunity to, and I wasn't. There's probably 50 Australian SOCOM guys got out and went across and contracted various roles, because we all thought the same thing. And then, by the start of 08, we were all back in, because like you guys, we just pedal to the metal. So Yeah, it was just that wanting to test myself. You know, you train, especially for us at that time. When I joined the army, there wasn't much money in our army. We were very small. I've got a very funny photo of when I went across to the CMAT project. They've given me, because I also got issued US uniforms and stuff. And I've got all this US kit, M4 and you know, a Glock, and it's like more gear just sitting there for me than I've ever experienced in the previous 6 years of my Australian career. I'm like, it's just me sitting there with my trunk, sorting my gear out, going, this is what wars are like my body. Yeah.
Now, at what age did you join, and how much time did you spend with the Australian Army before you got out and started contracting?
So I joined in 95 at 19, and I got out. So initially I took leave without pay. So I guess it's like going inactive for you guys. So you're still technically in, but you're not in. And then we were having the Commonwealth Games, which is like a mini Olympics that the Commonwealth countries do. And it was going to be in Australia, and they pretty much wanted to know, because so in Australia, our special forces do the domestic counterterrorism. So we don't have like an FBI HRT. So they wanted to know who is going to be ready, because they had to bump that up, and obviously all the other security apparatus that goes with holding a massive event. They basically said, you either all come back and get in, or you get out. And at that stage, I got out, which, yeah, so I wasn't alone, but that's also when, because at that stage, we were back in Afghanistan, and we were back in Iraq, and we were in East Timor, and, you know, we were in Solomon Islands, and we were probably the busiest period apart from World War II the Australian Defence Forces ever had. We're in about 7 countries. So
Gotcha. So while you were doing all of that stuff with the contracting and all that, you were still technically in the Australian military.
Initially, when I first went to Iraq, yeah. But when I went across to do the more high-level US stuff, because I got issued a US CAT card and some other stuff, that's when I got out of the Australian Army.
Gotcha. So in total, then, how much time did you spend in the Australian Army?
And then, so I was out for 2.5 years, which made it harder when I got back in, but that's a conversation later. So then I got back into the Australian Army in 2008, and got medically discharged in 2020.
Gotcha. So you joined in 95.
22 years.
So you joined initially in 1995, right? Yep. At the age of 19.
Yep. Spent
some time with the Australian military. Now, were you special operations during that time frame, or was it just regular Army? Like, what was your job?
Yeah, so at that point, all we had, as far as the special forces, officially, not role-wise, but officially, we had the Special Air Service in the regular army, and we had the commandos in the reserve army. And at that stage, they were really keeping skill sets alive that the army didn't want to use. But unlike, so if you go back to World War II, what the Australian Army became experts at, jungle warfare, long-range reconnaissance. So like a couple of the key operations, which I think more people should know about outside of Australia, Operation Jaywick, where some Australian Navy and Army guys, they stole a Japanese fishing vessel, and they put some like wooden plastic canoes on that shipping vessel, flew the Japanese flag, and went up into 80 k's outside of Singapore Harbour, canoed into Singapore Harbour. This is 1943. Canoed in, and they attached limpet mine, this is at night, to about 14 Japanese Navy vessels and sunk 11 of them. Canoed back, got back on that old fishing boat, and got back to Australia.
That's amazing.
Oh yeah. Like, and part of the reason why they're allowed to do it is no one believed it could be done. It was like, it's an old boat and 12 guys, fill your boots. And then when they had this massive success, the MacArthur, who was the head of the Allied forces in Asia, is like, let's get that going again. Let's get more of that stuff happening, because at the time, more Japanese forces up closer to Japan, and they had a second attempt, but this time with submarines and everything, and it all went haywire and got caught. And so all our special forces kind of lineage goes back to that operation, the JWIC. So the commandos were still doing klepper canoe work and beach landings and surveillance, and because as an island nation, that's still the threat even today with China, is that island hopping kind of get to New Guinea and then threatening to Australia. So, you know, they were weekend warriors and stuff, but they were still keeping some skill sets alive, raiding and that kind of stuff, that where our Special Air Service were experts in long-range jungle reconnaissance.
Gotcha.
By the time Vietnam came around, we'd already been in Indonesia and the Malaysian emergency fighting against communist guerrillas in the jungle. So when Vietnam came, Australia sent a large task force, 2 infantry battalions and the Special Air Service squadron and all the accompaniments into the, like we had our own province. And so the SAS would go out in a 4-man, 5-man patrol, look for signs of the Viet Cong or the NVA, and then alert the infantry battalions to those locations. And the Vietnamese hated them because they couldn't detect them. And that was really what our Special Air Service were training for. It wasn't until the counterterrorism threat emerged in the late 70s. But again, for us as an island, most of our threat was the oil rigs off the coast. So retaking an oil rig from a hostile force. So there was always a real maritime flavour to our domestic counterterrorism. And so they merged the clearance divers, which is, I guess, our version of the SEALs, but I'll break that up a little bit more, with the SAS, right? Because the theory is it's cheaper and quicker to teach a diver to shoot than a shooter to dive. This is the late 70s, early 80s. Gotcha. They still have to do the SAS selection course, but they wouldn't have to do the patrol course on that because they're the maritime experts. And so 2 of my uncles were part of that early 78 to 84 program. But in the Navy, they're even, it's only recently changed, but they weren't considered special operations, or, you know, they were just the divers, because the clearance diving teams, they have broken into elements. So you'll have underwater battle damage repair, you'll have mine countermeasures, and you'll have maritime tactical operations, which is your Navy SEAL stuff. And then I guess our version of what is development group is when a dive detachment gets plugged into the Army Special Operations units, and today that's a lot more fluid and stuff. So, but back then, that's all it was. So we had a parachute battalion, 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, and they were essentially like your Ranger Regiment. And then the other battalions were more upskilled jungle warfighting kind of organisations, fought at a section level. Yeah, so back then there wasn't real like we have now. There was no SOCOM, no Director of Special Operations, none. It was just the SAS. Gotcha. And then obviously once 9/11 happened and the whole changing of the soft communities and stuff, then we got a full-time commando regiment, 2nd Commando Regiment. They took over the domestic counter-terrorism duties. So one of their commando companies is always on call within Australia for domestic counter-terrorism operations. And then they've got a couple other fighting squadrons that would always, for example, companies. So for example, in Afghanistan, there was always a commando company group in Afghanistan, while at the same time they had another commando company group in Australia responsible for counterterrorism. Then you would have another commando company group refitting and getting ready to do one of those roles. So where you guys have a much more defined and more organizations where, because of our numbers, a lot more condensed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, how does your military, do you guys work? And again, this is just me not understanding how the UK's military and the Australian, now do you guys work hand in hand with each other? Do you guys, is it like the same military or is it completely different? Because I've heard you like the Australian, like SAS, and like, how do you guys, I guess, the relationship, right?
So they're completely separate militaries. We still, like Canada and New Zealand, swear allegiance to the King now, being a Commonwealth military. But under the Five Eyes Treaty, you would have seen this. There was always Americans and Brits and that at work on exchange, and we would always have guys over in exchange with the US. And so it always does make me laugh when you hear these comparisons between countries and units, because from 04 to 2015, 16, I was always at war with an American unit and with the Brits. And our tactics, we exercise together. We use the same helicopters, we use the same equipment. So it just became, it was nothing unusual to be on exercise in Australia. First Special Forces Group there, SEAL Team 5, for example, or you might be on another exercise in Fort Bragg, and you'd have, CAG, and you'd have 22, and you'd have JDF 2, and then you'd be in Kandahar, and here you going, you back in that province with those same guys from that exercise. So that certificate there is from the first group, an award from the first group CO in Afghanistan for doing work with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're all one, I guess, from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, because I know I spent a lot of time all my career in Afghanistan, and I would always see Australian dudes there, Canadians, Brits, like it was literally a coalition. Now, we'll jump right into some of your contracting time, because you mentioned you've done work with SF guys and SEALs, like just mainly SOCOM, right? Jumping right into that, like, talk to me about like your first experience as a contractor, where you were, how that went, and some of your founders' memories, whether it's firefights and some of that from that a specific time in your life.
Yeah, so I was in a crossroad in, like I say, in my career in Australia, because again, thinking I really thought I'd missed the boat for combat. And I was actually at a party with some guy, barbecue with some guys that I'd worked with in the commandos, and one of them was talking how he was going to Iraq next week on a contracting gig, and I was like, oh, that'd be the best. He goes, oh, they're still looking for guys. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, ring this bloke. And I did, and that Thursday I'm flying out to Jordan, so it was that quick. We flew into Jordan, because you couldn't get into Iraq any other way at that stage. Landed in Baghdad. We were in the red zone, not the green zone. Our compound was actually next to the interim Iraqi Prime Minister's compound, he was getting guarded by SEAL Team 10. So it's funny now when I listen to like DJ Shipley and that talk about that, because at night we would go on our roof and watch them, their snipers and that hit guys in the Baghdad Zoo and the Apaches, and so that was my first kind of real experience with your SF guys. And then when we went to Numanea, there was initially it was a police program for Dying Corps. So there was 5 or 6 old American coppers that were so out of their depth. They were walking around like zombies, always in their rig. And we get there because it's gone from being this policing contract to a military contract to a special operations contract. And so we're the military guys to go down and run this program. And we get there, and now this is how loose it was then. We drove in one vehicle, soft skin, it was a Jeep Cherokee B4 armored with a local driver. I didn't speak any Arabic or know anything at that stage, and 4 of us with all our gear down Route Jackson, which was at that stage like the second most dangerous road on earth, apart from Rad Irish, to Numanea by ourselves. No big convoy, no ISR, no QRF. And when I tell people that, they go, yeah, whatever, mate, come on. And they're like, I'm telling you, like, this is what we did, because we just didn't know. It was blissful. And so we get there, and like I said, they're zombies, and they're like, you know, it's hell here. It's so dangerous, because Numanea is only about 40 kilometers from the Iranian border, because it was a big air base during the Iran-Iraq war. And anyway, we're like, what do you mean? And they're like, you know, they're shooting every night. You've got to sleep in your stuff, and it's hell. And we're like, what do you mean they're shooting it every night? Like, incoming rounds, is it hitting? There's always shooting and stuff. So being soldiers, we go, all right, well, like, where's it coming from? And these guys had no idea, right? And then, you know, they're old coppers. And so we go, all right, well, where's it roughly coming from? And they point this direction, which was the perimeter. We kind of look around and we go, all right, well, we'll set an OP up over there tonight. And they're like, what's that? And we're like, it's an observation position. And they're, what does that mean? Well, we're going to go out there tonight, sit in those bushes and see what's going on. You're going out there at night? Yeah. That's crazy. Well, that's what we do. Like, anyway, so we go out, and after about not even an hour, we worked out that the perimeter security forces were half Kurdish and half Iraqi, and they hated each other. So the shooting at night was the guard towers shooting at each other. So once we work this out, we go in and we go, all right, down tools, go to bed. And they're like, no, what do you go? It's not, there's no insurgents out there. And at this stage, the insurgency hadn't even really happened. Like, there's no war, go to sleep. So the next day we go down to the contracting guardhouse, like the company that's running it. We go, do you guys do ammo counts and that for your guards? And they're like, no. And we're like, you realize they shoot each other? Oh yeah, we lose guards all the time. We're like, what? They said, oh yeah. And that's, you know, again, I had no idea about the Middle East at this stage. So there, yeah, the Kurds and that. Anyway, so that was my kind of introduction of that. And Rich, the old guy, who was an ex-group guy, who was running this QRF and checking when local national workers were coming in and that. And so it was my first real exposure to the Green Berets training local forces, and that, like, watching a couple of old, not Vietnam era, but these guys would have been in their late 40s and that. But do what Green Berets do, work with local forces, train local partnering forces. And I was like, because that's kind of what we were doing and what we wound up going on and doing. So that was first introduction there. And then we had no life support, nothing. So the closest PX was Fob Scania, which was essentially a big truck stop in the middle of Route Tampa from Kuwait to Baghdad. And so we go, how often do you do convoys there to get legit, like, food and stuff, and like, as in, like, from a PX? And they go, oh, we try to do one at least once every 2 weeks, but it depends on manning, because we need the guys for the perimeter and that. But I said, well, if we give you some shooters, can we do more? Because we got no access to any. And they go, yeah. So my first kind of combat and engagements was with these US contractors going on logistics runs. And it was one of those runs that when I engaged that vehicle, and Dan offered me the job, and then that moved me into Baghdad, into the green zone, and then into that real contracting. And at that stage, you had where the JSOC MSS was, and the SEALs and that, and you also had another US company in there, that Triple Canopy, which was headed up by one of the Delta bosses on the ground in Black Hawk Down. And I obviously knew all about that, but didn't realise some of the guys I was meeting. And I think that helped me, because I wasn't coming across as a fanboy. It was more shut up, learn. And at that stage, none of the units, probably apart from the SEALs because of the movies, had followings on Colton. There wasn't really an internet. So when someone goes, that guy's from SEAL Team 6 and that guy's from SEAL Team 2, you would, like most people at that stage didn't know all these different SEAL teams. And yeah, like everyone kind of knew about Delta Force, but obviously they don't call themselves Delta Force. So when they're going the unit or whatever, you're like, oh, whatever. And there at that stage, it was really downplayed. So when they said come to the range and do some shooting and communicating in that, it was a selection in you know, can I shoot, can I move, how do I react, and my problem solving and stuff. But it was guys that had been in the Battle of Black Hawk Down and some guy, and it was all about at that point, am I going to get rounds down range on a two-way range, or am I going to freeze? It wasn't about how fit I was. It was that determination. They didn't, I was kind of getting picked on what they saw me under fire and under stress. And what I actually found it that combat was my calm place. I was very comfortable in the chaos of combat. And then, so it was, and I kept my mouth shut, and I was, and a bit in awe. And then we were heading to Fallujah in a convoy, and we got hit every day. Like everyone going on Route Mobile in Michigan, we're getting hit. And all of a sudden, it became a bit of a dick measuring comp between different guys from different units, because it was like our way's better, our way's better. And I'm like, guys, we're all going there. Everyone gets a say. And they've kind of gone, and the boss goes, you're in charge now. And I'm like, what? And he goes, you're the team leader. You can keep the peace. And it was simply nothing more than I allowed everyone to kind of, well, I think this, or I've seen this, or what about this, or don't not include this. And it worked a lot better. And you had checked, you know, the saying was, you're only one mistake away from window or aisle.
Yeah, that's accurate. Now, you mentioned Fallujah. What year were you down there, and how was your experience there specifically?
So it was 2004. It was the second Battle of Fallujah. We were supporting Iraqi SOF operations in conjunction with their part in the battle with the Marines. I was there the night of HO and heard the man, be professional, be polite, but be prepared to kill everyone you see. Okay. And so, but when we were driving there in one of these convoys on the 12th of October, I was in the second vehicle. Now, for the prior 2 days, I'd been in the lead vehicle with our team leader and driver and our lead interpreter. But we added 2 vehicles to the package, and we were taking out, because we were taking our comm guys and setting some more comms up. So I got moved out of the lead vehicle for the comm guy and was in the second vehicle. Coming around the bend, and I can send you some photos and stuff, but I sort of flashed to the high right, and I was like, okay, that was different. And then the lead vehicle started slowing down, and I'm on the radio, you know, animal, this is Aussie, radio check, animal, nothing. And then you could see a bit of smoke. And so I said to our driver, like, Matty, let's like go up, something's wrong. And when we got up, we could see a hole in the windscreen of the vehicle. And what had actually happened, that flash was an RPG. And so he nudged the vehicle into the guardrail. And as we got out to inspect, all hell broke loose. We got opened up by a couple of PKMs to the high right. And so we're taking cover behind this, it was a B6 armored vehicle. We're returning fire. We've actually got some guys that was their first combat. And to be fair, that wasn't my first time I've been shot at, but this was definitely the biggest thing I was like, fine. And so Animal, who was the overarching team leader at that time for the overall convoy, ex-CAG guy. And he's just gone, like, you could just see there was a switch of that appreciation of the situation, what had to be done. And he goes, we've got to silence them. And I'm like, what does that mean? He goes, we've got to take them out. So we essentially, 4 of us assaulted this fixed position because we couldn't get to the guys inside the vehicle while we were getting shot at. Like, we were on the X and we couldn't get off the X. So we did, and then we came back, and Aaron and Dave, the driver and our team leader and the driver, were both deceased, and the commo guy and the interpreter survived. But the other thing that taught me, like, the Marines QRF turned up, and we still had to go to Fallujah. Like, we still had to go to work and go to war the next day, and it was the real. That's when you really learn the machine of war, and are you cut out for being a gunfighter? And it's all great to say you want to get into combat, and it looks cool in the movies, but when you're in an engagement like that, and it's very final, and then there's no, in the movies, that's when the credits come up. In real life, in combat, there's still an enemy out there. It's still dangerous. So so that was my.
Now, was that? Yeah, because while we're on the topic of Fallujah and all that, because I was there, I got there September of 2003, and I left September of 2004. So I spent a big chunk of time in Fallujah, Anbar Province, Camp Junction City, Camp Manhattan, TQ. Like, I spent, like, my first deployment was but I was doing route clearing IEDs and all of that stuff there, so I know that area pretty well.
You know route Michigan very well.
Oh yeah, route Michigan, just going up and down that place looking for IEDs. I used to hate it with a passion. Now, was that your first time experiencing death, and what did it do to you?
So it made me, at the time, I was, because we had to get into Fallujah, and it, like I said, like, literally keep setting the comms, and next day was another day. So there wasn't as much reflection at that initial time. One of the things I did immediately take away, Aaron and Dave were two of the most beautiful humans I'd ever met. Very religious, used to pray before every job, go to church on Sunday, and Animal's nickname was Animal, Tats, and he was like, that saying, only the good die young, really was one of my first reflections on that day. Like, these are beautiful people. Dave was a big part of me getting onto that team and contract. He was a ex-10th group guy. Aaron and his brother Shane were both 19 group guys. Shane was in country at that time with the Army. So it was the takeaway, and like, I was in that vehicle in that exact, where you go past before Kama, where Abu Ghraib is up on the right. So it's just there. And, I'd been in that vehicle on that road in that position of the prior 2 days. Why did it happen on the third day? Why did I get moved out of that vehicle? So there's a bit of that going on. But also watching Animal just click into a gear, and I didn't follow him. I found my own gear, and I realized I was good at it, and I enjoyed it. As far as, no one gave a shit about anything about me at that moment, except for, can I go up and neutralize that threat? That's all it came down to.
Yeah. No
race, religion, color. Not that I was an Aussie or nothing, but can I support my brothers under combat in that time? And I enjoy and still enjoy that part of it too.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the Battle of Fallujah. Is it as crazy as people are saying it was? Like, what was your experience during that time? Yeah,
and I know that we spoke a couple of days ago about one of your previous guests talking about it. There's a couple of things with Fallujah, and I've actually, the last time I was in Fallujah was 2015. So you, as a route clearer, you would know this. One of their tactics was putting young boys out in the middle of the road. And so here's this 19, 20-year-old Marine or soldier with a 6-year-old boy on the road. He's got a choice. Does he stop that vehicle, the lead vehicle on the convoy, knowing it's a complex ambush, or does he run over a 6-year-old boy? They would get the young kids to dig the holes for the IEDs, because that, again, it creates a moral dilemma. Do you shoot a young kid who's got a shovel, knowing that digging it for the IEDs, or do you not? And then knowing that that's going to be daisy chain 105 IED for some other one, route clearance or someone to take it later. So they, from the get-go, the Sunni insurgency played on the moral fibre of young US soldiers. And I remember for a month before the Second Battle of Fallujah, you'd remember, you'd probably been more a part of it than I was, certainly. Remember they built a man camp down at Haditha Dam?
Yep. Yep.
And they said to all the locals in Fallujah, like, we're coming in on this day. We'll help you move down to the dam. We've got medical supplies. No one left, mate. Like, when I say no, and you know, obviously some people did, but the majority of those residents in Fallujah stayed in Fallujah knowing that there was about to be a major battle, but to them, we were the kuffar, the infidel, and they were all in. And it's a pattern that you got to understand. It's the ideology and the belief structure. But even today, it's hard to wrap your head around the thought of a woman or a child being an active combatant in a war, and that there's no uniform, that anyone at any, and they can just put their weapon down, and all of a sudden, and everyone's got an AK in Iraq. You know, one day they might have it, one day they might have it. Yeah, so the complexities, unless you were there, and again, you know, you can probably speak to more of it than me being a year in that environment. But, you know, there was one of the things that in 05, when I was doing work with that program, we were doing low profile, low visibility route runs where we were trying to look for points and indicators and warnings. So they might put sheets out of their windows. They might put towels or blankets, or kids might be playing, or soccer balls, or a car bonnet up, to indicate to the locals that there's an IED on that road. They were very good, especially in Sada City and Haifa Street and stuff, at sanitizing post-contact, and then calling the BBC and other journalists in, then saying, you know, US troops or coalition troops conducted or killed Iraqis. Yeah, so I just think it was a very, very hard, complex terrain that got repeated in Afghanistan, got repeated, and is getting repeated in Gaza today.
Yeah, and it's like, I would speak with like veterans from like Vietnam or the World War II eras, and they would say, like, you guys, like the modern day soldiers, like, we had it worse because we didn't know who we were fighting, you know, because we would go out on patrols and guys would be in regular civilian clothes, and we didn't know if they were enemy or if they were friendly. And then we would go, and then we'd get to the turnaround point, turn around and come back, and that same guy would have an AK-47 shooting at us, you know, and they saw that as being difficult because they, like, in our era, we knew who we were fighting. They had uniforms. We had the Geneva Code. Like, we knew exactly how to handle it. You guys just had to react constantly, you know?
Yeah, and that's exactly, you know, the whole GWOT was like that. Like, later on, when I became an intelligence operator, there were times where the sources would say it might be about a dispute. So in Iraq, for example, one things that the coalition didn't understand was their cultural complexities. And so a village sheikh would come in with his 20 workers and get them a job. And if one of those workers stole something or whatever, if you didn't follow proper protocol, which was call in the sheikh and explain to him, let him deal with it to save face, then his retribution was planting a few IEDs. Like, if you didn't employ his workers, they would IED the route. So, you know, like for 2 weeks, you might have really good relationships with the local village, and for no reason that you're aware of, next minute they turn on you and they're IEDing roads or firing indirect fire into your base and position. And that's the other thing. You were never completely confident, like this Iraqi, this Afghan, this Somali, this occurred is working with us, because that could change overnight without you knowing.
Exactly, exactly. So that was Iraq. Now I know you mentioned that you were also in Syria doing some work whenever there was that big debacle with U.S. forces and Wagner Group. What can you tell us about that specific scenario? Were you around, or
So
how did that
that's
develop?
yeah. Well, that's 2015, and that's when you had the caliphate and or post kind of caliphate. The big issue with that, it all goes back to in August 13. Prior to that, President Obama, you would remember the red line.
Mm-hmm.
If you chemical weapons and at that stage, so historically, as far back as World War One, Russia's always had a naval base in Tartus in Syria. It's their naval base for that Mediterranean. So strategically, Russia's always, even when the Sykes-Picot divided the Levant up after World War One, Russia still got Tartus. So when that's why Putin backed Assad so strongly, because of that historical connection. And so when Obama drew a red line and basically said, if you do this, we're going to come in, and they did it, and he did nothing, everyone's like, oh, he's, bark's worse than his bite. That's when Putin moved forces in. But he'd also stood back and watched the way the American private military companies had been established. And so then he went about established Russian private military companies, Wagner Group and others. And there's always that, initially there's that, it goes back to the Sandline affair in Sierra Leone and stuff. It's denial plausibility, like they're doing Russian government business, but they're some rogue company that, they're not ours, we don't. So then you had some uneasy, we'll call them truce lines, and they were always the Tigris and the Euphrates. And one thing that ISIS did very well early on was target the oil sites inside of Syria and Iraq. And like some of them are only small. And on this occasion, the Syrian and Russian Wagner forces, again, were all about money. And so Wagner thought, if we can take this oil field, we'll extort and sell this oil and make millions of dollars. What they didn't realise was that there was a CAG team in that facility, and it was inside, because it was inside the Americans' area, because the Americans and Australians were supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces against the Assad Syrian and Russian forces. And so the Wagner and Syrians essentially, like you see in Ukraine, armoured column 500 attacked the facility, but you had some CAG guys in there with JTACs that just caught in fast air, and literally within a couple of hours they essentially annihilated 300-400 Wagner mercenaries, and they didn't try it again. But that has kept a peace in Syria and in Africa since that day, and it's the American forces will contact you and will stand their ground and will destroy you. So so there was a lot of that friction in that. Once the caliphate, as in the ISIS caliphate, started being diminished in middle of 2015, and Russia put a lot more forces into Syria, it was always going to happen. So they actually had, like even that day, the American operations at CENTCOM rang the Russian operations and said, cleared the airspace for the American fast movers to come in. So the Russians essentially approved authority for the American close air support to kill Russian Wagner force guys. That's how complex. That's how complex that was.
Yeah. That's funny there. Like because without the airspace approval, those jets would not have been able to make their way through. So that's funny. We have about 20 minutes left, Shane, so we'll hit on a couple of different topics before we close this out. Now, you've seen the what's the word I'm looking for? You've seen the war side of things as far as the very active side of things where you're fighting in the trenches with guys, and then now you're doing the intelligence side, or you also seeing the intelligence side of things. Which one do you prefer more, the intelligence side or the very active side?
Well, so I was lucky that I had been in combat before I got into intelligence, so I never chased that, which actually made me more effective as an analyst. But intelligence, it's my calling. Like, you know, especially in the ODAs, some guys just are gun nuts, and on weekends they shoot PSA, and some guys love parachuting, and I was never that. Like I'm a reader. I love history. I love finding a target. I love developing a source. I love building a threat network. I love briefing, and I love seeing all of my work come to fruition with a successful operation by an action arm. So that's me. I love that.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now this one's a controversial one for you. If you were in the United States and you had to go towards a special operational group, whether it's Navy SEAL, Green Berets, combat controllers, MARSOC, which one would you gravitate towards and why? See, I told you it's gonna be hard.
As a young guy, it would have been Special Forces, because especially you know, your Vietnam, your doctrinal is going out small team and getting after it. But my love and passion for intelligence collection would be one of those JSOC units that go and develop pattern of life and understand threat networks and do advanced force operations. Yeah, I love that. That's mine.
And that's what a lot of people don't understand, especially you having worked with first group teams. Like in the ODA, you have the 18 Fox, the intelligence sergeant, right? And then you have the guy that is qualified, you know, through his training to go recruit sources, to develop sources, to do all of that, right? So the ODA is all encompassing, right? From start to finish. It can create its own network. It can, you know, action targets. It can do all of that, man. And that's shit. That's a freaking advantage within itself, as opposed to relying on other people to develop that for you. So that's awesome. So now, if you had a chance to do it all over again from the time when you were 19, what would you have done different, if anything?
The hard part initially to answer that is the injury to my back. Not much, because I loved every minute of my career, and unlike your military, we weren't set up with all these pathways and different soft action arms. Like I said, we just had the special air service, and if you couldn't carry 50 kilos on your back up and down monstrous mountains, then you were no good to them, because that was their job. You know, it was lasting 4, 5, 6 days in the jungle, in the desert. You know, yeah. But if I was 19, like say in 2010, definitely would have streamed direct entry to where I wound up. Wouldn't have but I think sometimes you've got to know what you don't like to know what you love. You know, like I said, I did the diving and worked at the dive school, and you know, the parachuting and all that. And to me, it's just an extraction, or it's just a tool to get you to do your job. You know, even like I wound up being qualified, and I had this conversation on the weekend. Wound up being qualified in like 19 weapons plus foreign weapons, and it was a good shot, but you know, like, was never jumping around and go, let's go to the range, where some guys, they just go nuts. So like, enjoyed it all, but to me, I just viewed it as that is just a tool for my job, whereas pulling apart a threat network and using my brain, yeah, I love that.
Gotcha. So now, here's another one for you. Having seen war and having been at war and seeing what it does to a person, right now at that point in your life, would you encourage like your son or anybody else to join the military? And Why, if so?
Yeah, so I've got a veteran equine therapy non-profit where I work with veterans now on that, unpacking that trauma from their combat experience. I've got 3 young sons, or a 25-year-old and 2 young sons. Would I encourage them? Yes, but they would have to live and breathe it. Not be, the military is not something you want to be forced to do. You've got to, like when someone comes to me and says, I want to be a clearance diver, I want to be a commando. I'm like, all right, get up at 2 a.m, put a set of overalls on, get under a cold shower, go for a run. If you don't want to do that, well, then you don't want to be a commander or a diver. Like, you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable because you just love it. And so that's the advice I would give to them is you've got to, if you love what you want to do, then go do it.
That's good advice, man. And I can resonate with the, you don't want to force anybody to do it. You know, you want to make sure they have all the information and then let them make that decision for themselves, because guilt is a thing, right? You convince somebody to join and something happens. Now you feel guilty because you gave him that extra nudge, you know what I mean, to push them off the deep end, and now they're at war and you don't have a peace of mind. So I agree 100%. It has to be their decision, whether or not they want to go towards that route. So I agree 100% with that statement.
The amount of guys, and this is across the Five Eyes, that when they do whatever selection it is, will actually have a photo of their current unit with them, and that's them. I don't want to go back to there. I've always found that as an interesting driver, because to me, it was a service, not a unit, but it was the challenge and my passion that drove me. But I've always found that, and it's a pretty common thing. You know, I had a laminated picture of my old unit, and there was no way I was going back to there, a failure. I was like, okay.
Yeah. Some people use that as motivation, especially in the U.S. military too. We also do that because everybody's experience is different. Like when I went to selection from my old unit, I didn't have any problems with my old unit. I loved it. But other guys that were there, their old unit was so bad, whether it was a leadership problem or whatever. And most of the time it's a leadership problem. They didn't want to go back to that unit. So they gave it 150% just so they don't fail to go back and have to live that environment again. So I understand it.
Yeah, but my question and comment always is around that. There's shit leaders in every unit. So
I agree.
You might get to your ODA and your first leaders at 2 there. Like, if that's your driver, whereas if it's your job, like I've had some terrible bosses, but I loved my job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that was always like, there's for a lot of my career, especially the back end stuff, I would have done it for free. Like, and even though I've got all these injuries and that now, if I, like I said earlier, if I could go back to that 2010, 2011 timeframe, I do it in a heartbeat. Best time of my life.
I agree 100%. Like I wouldn't change anything in my career for to save my life, even if I had a time machine. But so what do you got going on right now, Shane? Are you completely out of the game, or are you still doing intel stuff? You mentioned you have a nonprofit. What exactly do you have going on right now? What does the future look like for you? And if anybody want to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I did have a really bad patch with PTSD and stuff, and wound up in hospital for a while. When I was in there, it was, if I can use my experience to help other veterans, then I'm going to do that. So I've been pretty vocal with my experience in that find, fix, finish. It kind of bookends with that. You know, the start of it is a job that I did in 2011 in Afghanistan, and you look, oh, this guy's this soldier, and then at the end it's me breaking down coming home from Iraq. So that was and then the first time I was in the media did an article about my story, my phone blew up with guys that I'd worked with going, mate, I thought I was the only one. Like, I thought that it was me. Like, how did you go to hospital? What was that about? And so that was like, I'd already kind of ticked that next purpose bit, and that's been driving me even more so, like in Australia, the government came out and said that special operations in Afghanistan conducted war crimes, and there's a lot of stigma there, and there's a lot of that going on. So there's a lot of veterans now questioning their service. So I'm doing a lot of work in that space. But my first job outside of defence was in the counter-violent extremism space. So if there's a convicted terrorist, they're going to get paroled at some stage, or you know, are they going to get paroled, or should they be paroled? So I was part of a team with some psychologists and that we would go and interview them and conduct an assessment of, do they still have that ideology? Do they still want to join ISIS? Do they still want to go? And then write reports for the court based on that. You know, there's a couple of different assessment tools we use. Vera 2R and Trap 18 are probably the two most common. So I still do a lot of that work, assisting different organisations. I do a weekly terrorism Gaza update on TNT radio, and I'm pretty active in the information space on X with. I've still got a lot of sources, you know. I've got sources in Afghanistan and Iraq and around the place, you know, and so I'm still getting, like, it makes me laugh after the ISIS attack in Moscow. Oh, ISIS back. I've been tweeting about ISIS every week for, you know, they got camps in Al-Anbar, 10,000 fighters again. Like, they've been re-emerging for 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I'm active in that, you know. In 2005, I did a course in Israel with Shin Bet. And so obviously now with the Israel thing and ideology and stuff, I'm doing a fair bit of commentary and advice around the, you know, both of those organisations see this as a war of their very existence. It's not just a little conflict. You know, they both believe the other side wants to wipe them off the face of the earth. So, yeah, doing a bit of commentary and education in that space. But really, my non-profit Pegasus Connections, equine therapy, we've got a farm, take veterans and their families out there using horses and that to regulate emotion. And, you know, I looked at some of the work that Mike Glover and Chris Van Zandt and those organisations. The US veteran space is about 10 years ahead of where we are in Australia. You know, you're moved away from pharmaceutical therapies to, you know, non-traditional, you know, THC and CBD oils and that stuff. So I do a lot of research in what is working for your community and trying to bring that into our community. And just my literally goal is to help veterans rebuild their life. You know, you join the military and it's you go from a me environment to a we environment to serve. You get out of the military and you don't really fit into the me. You're not part of the we anymore. Where are you? You've been given your orders for all your professional career. For the first time, you actually can make a decision. You can choose who you're to vote for. You can choose what values you want to have. You can choose anything. And that spins some people out. They're not used to that. Even a simple thing like, how do I see the doctor? Because of the whole service life, you just go down to see the medic, you know, or how do you get physio? And little things like this. Some, you know, you do 20 years, you're institutionalized, and these, in our case, they're, you know, you go recruit school, trade school, you know, 2-3 years before you actually got at your job. You're out. There's no real transition path. You're out, for me, in a day. And so how do you unwind all that training and hypervigilance and conditioning that they spent years developing overnight? Like, when I was getting sick, one of the psychologists looked at me and she said, part of your issue is you're a lion who's trying to become a domestic cat. And so how do you, you know, a lot of veterans have adjustment disorder rather than post-traumatic stress. And if those of us that do, you know, you can still grow with PTS, you know, like, you've just got to know what your triggers are. And so a lot of this kind of conversation I have with veterans and explain, and in our whole careers, all we want to do, you know, is learn information. We're constantly learning new skill sets. And so not knowing is worse than knowing. So, okay, I'm sick, like, I'm getting angry. why am I getting angry? And so a lot of what I do is give information, because that's what we've always done in our careers. You know, just because you learn an M16 when you join the army, it's not the only weapon you ever got. You continually upgraded your skill set. That's who we are. And so now we're out and we're getting sick, or we've got these issues. We're searching for information. We're searching for new lessons learned. And so, yeah, that's literally what I do. And yeah, why
That's a
come podcasts like this and people like yourself give me the opportunity to say to veterans, you know, you're not alone. You don't suffer in silence.
I agree, man. And that's and that's one of the reasons why I started doing this is to, you know, talk to the community, let them know, hey, you're not alone in this. It's okay to go to the doctor. It's okay to clear the attic out and share your experiences and hear feedback. Like when we were, you know, running and gunning, it was okay, but we didn't do it because we thought it would make us look weak. You know what I mean? At least within my community. And a lot of guys hold on to that even though they're out. And it's like, no, dude, like this dream of living a good life, it's also for you. You just have to go get it. And it's okay to sit with another dude and talk about, you know, what you went through and how it makes you feel. Like it's a stigma, but we're slowly tearing it down by people like you and me on here talking about it. So I applaud you for doing that. And whatever I can do to help, you just let me know. And then we'll go from there. If people want to reach out to you, Shane, like how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Shane Healey, or on X, Twitter, Shane Healey Terrace Hunter. It was a nickname we got given, and it's kind of stuck, and it makes me laugh. But anyway, yeah. So they're my two platforms. LinkedIn's the big one, you know, especially for Pegasus Connections, the non-profits on there too. And so I do a lot of Q&As. A lot of people ask questions, you know, about even how to use the veteran system more, but, you know, because the biggest thing I learned, you don't know what you don't know, which is why you need your brothers and sisters, because like you might know you're getting angry, you might know you're down, but they see it. And so if they have the ability to say, hey, brother or sister or whatever, what's up? You're not your normal self. Well, that's when the light bulbs, this is why you can't do it by yourself. And it's not a weakness because you're not asking for help, you're asking for support. And I think that's a key phrase.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Shane, I appreciate you coming on, man. I know it's 1 o'clock in the morning down there where you're at. So we'll wrap this up. Folks, if you have any questions for Shane or if you want to reach out to him, LinkedIn, you can also put your question in the description down below. We'll get to him as fast as we can. Shane, I appreciate you coming on, man. Folks, until next time, take care of yourself.
Cheers.